Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews, with your host, Arlyeon. On today's show, I'll be plunging into Weather Factory's card-based how-to guide for Eldritch Abominations Cultist Simulator, which has been courteously provided by them for review purposes. We'll be finding out if it represents a glorious alchemy of lore and experimental gameplay, or if the experience will leave you despairing. Now, kicking off this particular review, I'll be touching on Cultist Simulator's narrative, and specifically the way it addresses telling it. See, whilst there's an overarching story to Cultist Simulator, it's only really the beginning and the goal which are set in stone, and even the former has some options. Summary-wise, you're a mostly uninitiated scrub who finds themselves introduced to cult stuff, TM. Now, the specifics of what kind of scrub you are is told via the game's various legacies, a sort of set of vignettes told via the descriptions and outcomes of the various actions you take at the beginning of your foray into the unspeakable. Essentially what this means is it determines whether you're a detective who becomes ensnared by the details of a former case, a dilettante struck by tragedy who seeks to learn more out of curiosity and boredom and fiscal mismanagement, or something else besides, given there's the options of a doctor, a dancer, intern. Honestly, the legacies serve as building blocks for the narrative. From there, the majority of the story comes from the way that Cultist Simulator builds its world, vis-a-vis the description of the areas you explore for resources, and the dusty tomes you pore over. Each one provides colorful insight into the world itself, with the actions you're taking providing the gist of the story. Whilst there certainly is some interesting elements in the routes you take as you progress further into the occult, and the ultimate means by which you can transcend your humanity, or die trying, the story in Cultist Simulator is very much about the journey. And with the recent release of the Bring the Dawn update, we actually get another look at this world, and the dire repercussions of what your acolyte-turned-abomination aspires towards, as you get to move from taking the role of your initial neophyte to a devoted cultist who is in service to your prior, now ascended character. Basically, you get to gleefully help to further some properly bleak and outright Lovecraftian machinations as they continue to pursue their ambitions. Not only do these particular routes offer some rather interesting nuggets of lore, they also introduce a number of characters to the game proper which had been hinting at in other bits of media. And this is a key element to Cultist Simulator, as well as the game proper holds quite a bit for those who crave story. There's also some absolutely intriguing breadcrumbs for players to dig up in the guts of the game, if they're only willing to find the answer as to whether they're a bird or worm. Now, whilst Cultist Simulator is a card game, it's a bit tricky to describe since there's a lot going on in this particular title, especially since a fair amount of the initial experience more or less entails discovering just how things work. I may have starved to death, admittedly, around the same time I first made a step of actual progress, TM. And you know, that's the thing. The first thing you'll likely encounter in Cultist Simulator is that there's a certain core loop in the background of the game. Regardless of whatever legacy you pick, though admittedly, these do serve to provide different options and advantages for moving forward and kicking things off, you'll find yourself working in order to pay your bills and avoid starving to death, while also juggling your mental and physical health, and, you know, not succumbing to crippling depression. So basically, it's just sort of like living in this current generation. I mean, somewhere in the midst of these shenanigans, you also need to figure out how to use the 5 key actions at your disposal to acquire cultist lore, so that you can get a better understanding of the eldritch underpinnings of the world, and, you know, maybe found a cult in the interim, but day-to-day stuff. And culting in itself does unlock a lot of options for what you can do, given that it allows you to acquire followers, as well as do such wonderful activities as forging arcane relics, seducing strangers to use as sacrificial lambs, and solving problems with the power of knife to the face. Which, of course, makes figuring out what kind of cult you want to be, and by extension what type of followers you want to specialize in, a pretty important choice, which I might not have done right the first time around. But anyways, for both the sake of figuring out which type of cultist you'd like to see reach their pinnacle, and how will advance, the combination of this decision, your legacy, and whatever ascension you choose to pursue will more or less set the tone for how difficult the game is, given the requirements for some of these routes and the specific hurdles they put in your path. So, invariably, whilst living your best hashtag cultist life, you're gonna probably start generating all sorts of new problems for yourself. Whether it's vis-a-vis madness and dread, which adds an extra bit of nuance to the old resource management factor, or the generation of mystique and notoriety, which are, respectively, giant red flags which say, "I'm mysterious, look at me," and "Hey, I'm committing crimes against humanity over here." Both of these will arouse the suspicion of investigators, though only the latter will really allow them to build a case to send you to whatever gulag they toss eschatology-obsessed lunatics into. And yes, that's a word. While you can poison, stab, or drive them mad, that's more of a temporary solution, since there's always more to replace them, and some of the replacements have traits which may make them far worse to contend with than their peers, and plus, driving them mad may translate into them seeing the writing on the wall, going "screw this, I'm joining the winning side," and then going at this cultist business with a passion that would put you to shame. Yes, you can entirely lose to the investigator turned cultist, ascending to full abominationhood before you do. And don't even get me started on the long that are part and parcel of the Apostle legacies, those hard modes where you're serving your former ascended character, because they'll make you, well, long for the intention of the investigator and troublemakers, given the various escalating obstacles they'll be rather persistently directing towards you. So, yeah, there's a heck of a lot of stuff to keep on top of while you're trying to figure out all this stuff. Or figuring out the rituals to summon up alien entities from outside the waking world. Well, so, it's just probably a good thing that you have a pause button to help you from making these horrible mistakes. I mean, yes, there's also a ×2 speed thing in case you're impatient and want to make more small mistakes. I mean, to save time. Yeah, that one. Anyways, when it comes to its musical arrangement, it was really easy to lose myself into Cultist Simulator's soundtrack. The manner in which the various left motifs managed to complement not only the game's theme, but also adjust itself to the actions I was making at any given time, is just profoundly great. In fact, there was a number of times where I was only tipped off to how dreadful I'd allowed my situations to become in-game by the manner in which the music became decidedly more ominous, or intensified as the once distant peril of growing mad became the imminent threat of doom. But even beyond that, I just really enjoyed the ambience of the themes, as it really did accentuate the whole process of just investing myself into the world and getting into the proper mindset to plan my next action. Now, the graphics department is rather interesting. At a glance, things seem rather simple at first, but there's a fairly interesting amount of detail if you take a closer look, with a number of the game's cards having some altogether macabre bits of artwork. I am looking at you, Red Grail painting. Also, the simple animations on the cards helped to add a certain uncanny element to them, which was interesting when I noticed it. I'll also admit that the rather abrupt change in appearance to the board the first time I went to the Mansis had me dropping my jaw for a couple reasons. But it was a rather neat effect after the more mundane appearance of the basic table. Functionality-wise, I also just find the UI fairly easy to navigate. It's nice to be able to track funds and stats at the bottom of the screen, even if the board itself can become an absolutely disorganized clusterfuck if you don't keep on top of arranging your cards. Sue me, I'm sorta sloppy sometimes. Anyways, at this point I've played my fair share of Cultist Simulator. Something like 116 hours of obsessively plunging through the twisting chaos of its nefarious narrative at the time of this writing, trying to make sense of just the peculiar lore that the developer has built up, as well as just enacting a veritable litany of larcenous and greatly licentious bits of esoteric evil-doing. So, very bad cult stuff. There's so much to do in this game, and there's the romances. I hadn't mentioned it, I'm sorry. But exploring that with the various followers was also a lot of fun. It wasn't a flawless time. I enjoy reading and diving into the lore, but I'll admit that the core gameplay can get a bit repetitive at times, especially given the parallels between some of the basic Ascension routes. But there is still a fair amount of flexibility and options provided, vis-a-vis the legacies and the cults. Plus the spontaneous issues that would crop up. Read frequently self-imposed because I'm an idiot, that can arise, ultimately just sort of helped keep me thoroughly hooked with the game. You know, adversity is fun, especially when it's caused by you not paying attention at times 2 speed. On a very personal and obsessive level, Cultist Simulator resonated with my desire to both develop and experience a Lovecraftian story where I got to play as the villain, and I found myself coming back to it every time a new bit of content released for it. The overall quality of the writing also plays a fairly large factor in that, since I am admittedly a lore-hungry nerd and a huge fan of Call of Cthulhu. More the RPG than the book, but hey, I got a sort of nice vibe from this, so yeah, basically for that reason, and the fact that I can gush about this game a fair amount, I'd say this personally strikes me as a crit hit. And this brings this episode to an end, so I'd like to thank you folks for both tuning in and sticking till the end. Whether you agree or disagree with my thoughts, I'd love to hear from you folks in the comments, and for those interested in more indie reviews or interviews with the developers, feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you can get notified when we have a new release. Lastly, join our Discord, link in the description and in the banner, so you can become a part of our community. It's cozy there. Anywho, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks!